The chaotic funeral of King George III. King George III was the King of Great Britain and Ireland from 1760 until his death in 1820. He was born on the 4th of June 1738 and reigned for a remarkable 59 years, making him the longest reigning king in British history at the time. George III was born in London, England, and was the grandson of King George II. He ascended to the throne in 1760 at the age of 22, after the death of his grandfather. Initially, he was popular among the British people, who had very high hopes for his reign. One of the significant events during King George's reign was the American Revolutionary War. The American colonists sought independence from British rule, leading to a conflict between the colonies and the British government. George III was determined to suppress the rebellion, but ultimately the war ended in American victory, resulting in the formation of the United States of America. George III also had a strained relationship with Parliament. He believed in the power of the monarchy and desired more influence over government affairs. This led to conflicts with Parliament and frequent changes in the government. He appointed and dismissed numerous prime ministers during his reign, which contributed to political instability. He was also involved in the Napoleonic Wars, which was a series of conflicts between Britain and France under the leadership of Napoleon Bonaparte. Britain formed coalitions with other European powers to resist French expansion. Despite suffering setbacks initially, Britain and its allies eventually defeated Napoleon, establishing Britain as a major European power. In the later years of his reign, George III experienced recurring episodes of mental illness, which are believed to be symptoms of porphyria. These episodes affected his ability to rule, and his son, the future King George IV, acted as Prince Regent from 1811 until George III's death. King George III's reign had a profound impact on British history. He presided over a period of immense change, including the loss of the American colonies and the rise of the Industrial Revolution. He also played a significant role in the development of constitutional monarchy and the growth of the British Empire. His reign is often remembered for his struggles with mental illness, his role in the American Revolutionary War, and his efforts to exert control over government affairs. Despite the challenges he faced, his long reign left a lasting mark on British history. The funeral procession began at Windsor Castle, where the king had passed away. The coffin was placed in a hearse drawn by 6 horses and covered with black velvet pall, adorned by silver decorations. The funeral procession was a grand and elaborate affair, with military personnel, nobility, and members of the royal family partaking. King George III passed away on the 29th of January 1820, but it took over 2 weeks for his funeral to be held on February the 16th, 1820. This allowed ample time for all the necessary arrangements to be made for this magnificent occasion. The funeral preparations were organised by France and Beckwith, who had previously handled the funeral of Queen Charlotte less than 2 years before. According to the newspapers, this event surpassed even the grandeur of the celebrations for his Golden Jubilee in 1809 and the funeral of his late wife, Queen Charlotte, in 1818. In the past, accommodations and horses were secured on the day before the event. However, this time it was nearly impossible to find lodging anywhere, as everything was immediately booked as soon as the date was announced. Many people had to settle for sleeping on carpets instead of beds. And at 9 o'clock in the morning, several close friends of the late king's household were granted access to view the body laying in state. Shortly after, His Royal Highness the Duke of York, accompanied by Colonel Stephenson, inspected the preparations for the royal burial. An hour later, the gates were opened to the general public. Thousands of people wanted to pay their respects, resulting in somewhat a chaotic situation. Men and women of all ages were tightly pressed against each other, posing a risk to their lives. The police stationed at the gates did their best to control the masses, but their efforts were in vain. The cries of women and children echoed in every direction, and several women fainted and had to be rescued from being trampled. A detachment of artillery under the command of Colonel Cathcart, stationed in the Long Walk, began firing a salute at daybreak. They continued with 5-minute intervals of gunfire until 8 in the evening, when they switched to firing 1-minute intervals. Throughout the day, the great bell of the chapel, as well as the bells of Windsor and Eton, tolled solemnly. As soon as daylight appeared, a multitude of carriages could be seen converging on the town from all directions. During the course of the day, several thousand individuals were granted entry into the chambers where the body was placed for public viewing. However, at 3 p.m. the gates were closed, and nearly an equal number of people were unfortunately excluded from witnessing this profoundly solemn and impressive sight. At 7 p.m. His Royal Highness the Duke of York entered the room of mourning and took his seat at the head of the coffin, assuming the role of chief mourner until the body was relocated. The following morning, the various groups that had joined the procession gathered in St. George's Hall under the guidance of Sir G. Naylor. The arrangements faced initial challenges due to a larger than expected number of attendees, but eventually everything proceeded as planned. The peers entered through Elizabeth Gate and made their way to the King's Lodge, then crossing over to Kitchen Gate and entering the castle at the eastern end of the state apartments. Tickets for admission to the chapel were distributed, followed by tickets for entry to the lower yard, where a part of the procession was set to pass through. At 8:45, the coffin was brought through the different rooms, resting on the same platform used during the funeral of the late Queen. The chapel was adorned in a magnificently decorated fashion, surpassing any previous display of splendour. A raised platform extended from the south aisle up the nave to the choir, and it was covered in black cloth with foot guards positioned on either side, every second man holding a wax candle. Behind them, around 500 Eton scholars were stationed, all granted admission by special order of the now King George IV. In the north aisle, seating arrangements were made with elevated tiers for those individuals who held admission tickets. However, after 7 p.m, those tickets were deemed invalid. The choir area was also prepared to receive distinguished guests and could accommodate up to 94 people. The chapel itself was draped in black, including the knights' stalls. The altar was adorned with black hangings, and temporary seats were set up nearby for foreign ministers and other notable individuals attending the procession, such as the Duke of San Carlo, Count Leven, and Baron Linsingen. The communion table was covered with gold plates sourced from both the Chapel Royal in London and the Chapel Royal in Windsor. Above the royal mausoleum, a canopy made of luxurious blue velvet was placed. At its top, a golden crown rested on a cushion, while a Gothic scroll with festoons adorned the border, displaying the royal arms. This arrangement remained in place for several days, allowing the public to view it. The sight of the procession descending the grand staircase of the castle, accompanied by banners and more, was reported to be remarkably striking. Those admitted to the lower courtyard enjoyed a full view of the processions, and upon the processions reaching the great gate of St. George's Chapel in the south aisle, the King's body was received by the Dean of Windsor, and the organ immediately played the hymn, "I am the resurrection and the life saint the Lord." The funeral service composed by Dr. Croft and Mr. Purcell commenced, and the procession entered in an orderly manner. The royal body was placed on a platform with crowns and cushions placed upon it. His Royal Highness the Duke of York, serving as the chief mourner, occupied the position at the head of the corpse, with supporters on either side. The royal princes sat near the chief mourner, and the Lord Chamberlain and His Majesty's household took his place at the feet of the corpse. Around 9 a.m. the first segment of the procession entered the south aisle, and it took until a little after 10 a.m. for everyone to be seated within the chapel. The ceremony itself lasted approximately an hour. King George III was interred in the chamber beneath St George's Chapel, alongside other members of his family, including Princess Amelia, his wife Queen Charlotte, and Princess Charlotte, the daughter of George IV, who was Prince Regent at the time of her death in 1817. The funeral of Queen Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz. The funeral of Queen Charlotte, also known as Sophia Charlotte, graced the annals of history as the Queen of Great Britain and Ireland, marking her reign alongside King George III from the momentous day of their union on the 8th of September 1761 until her peaceful passing in 1818. Her marriage to George III also conferred upon her the title of Electress of Brunswick, Lunenburg, Hanover, before assuming the mantle of Queen of Hanover on the 12th of October 1814. Charlotte's legacy as Britain's longest-serving queen consort is undeniably remarkable, spanning an impressive tenure of 57 years and 70 days. Hailing from the ruling lineage of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, a duchy nestled in northern Germany, Charlotte's journey intertwined with this young and unmarried George III, who ascended to the British throne in 1760. In Charlotte, George found a suitable consort, although she was a minor German princess who was disinterested in the political sphere. The union between George III and Charlotte endured for 57 years, blossoming into a family that encompassed 15 children, a staggering 13 of whom thrived into adulthood. Among these were two future British monarchs, George IV and William IV. Furthermore, the family included Charlotte, Princess Royal, who later ascended to become Queen of Württemberg, and Prince Ernest Augustus, who eventually donned the crown as King of Hanover. A connoisseur and benefactor of the arts, Charlotte carved her identity as an amateur botanist, contributing significantly to the expansion of Kew Gardens. Her introduction of the Christmas tree to Britain, festooning one of the delight of children in Windsor during a Christmas gathering in 1800, stands as a charming testament to her cultural influence. Despite her illustrious contributions, Charlotte bore the weight of distress caused by her husband's recurring bouts of physical and mental afflictions, which eventually became a permanent burden in his later years. Her poignant bond with Queen Marie Antoinette of France, intertwined with the tumultuous era of the French Revolution, undoubtedly adding emotional strain to Charlotte's life. As the king's health declined, her eldest son George was appointed regent in 1811. Tragically, in November 1818, Charlotte passed away, her son George by her side, and remarkably, George III followed suit a little over a year later, possibly unaware of his beloved wife's demise, marking the end of an era deeply entrenched in history's pages. The funeral of Queen Charlotte, held on the 2nd of December in the year 1818, was a ceremonial event of profound significance and majestic grandeur, commemorating the passing of Queen Charlotte, who had peacefully departed this life on the 17th of November of the same year. This solemn occasion unfolded within the hallowed halls of St George's Chapel, a sacred place where the final rites were conducted to honour and pay tribute to the revered Queen. It was here that Queen Charlotte found her eternal rest, enclosed within the newly constructed royal vault, a testament to enduring love and royal legacy envisioned by her husband, the esteemed King George III, who had initiated its creation back in 1804. A masterful depiction of the royal vault, crafted by the skilled hands of Alfred Young Nutt, the diligent surveyor at the chapel, in the year 1849, captures the essence of the vault's original manifestation. Over time, alterations and renovations were undertaken, particularly towards the end of the 19th century. These adjustments involved the relocation of the coffins, the removal of their former velvet coverings, and the installation of new polished oak and sturdy ironwork, transforming the resting place into an embodiment of regal elegance and permanence. The life of Queen Charlotte commenced on the 19th of May 1744 within the confines of a modest court in northern Germany. Born as Sophia Charlotte of the House of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, she embraced the royal mantle at a youthful age of 17, entering into matrimony with King George III on the 8th of September 1761. Thus she ascended to the position of Queen of Great Britain. Through a reign that transferred over 50 years, both Queen Charlotte and King George III stood witness to and navigated through pivotal historic events of global magnitude. These encompass the tumultuous era of the 7 Years' War, the expansion and consolidation of the British Empire in India, the fervour and upheaval of the American War of Independence, the seismic waves of the French Revolution, and the convulsions of the Napoleonic Wars. Among these monumental events, Windsor emerged as a sanctuary for King George III, Queen Charlotte, and their expansive family. The deep-seated connection to Windsor not only manifested in their residential abode, but also in their decision to commission the construction of the Royal Vault, a sanctuary envisioned as their ultimate resting place. However, at the time of their youngest daughter Princess Amelia's passing in November 1810, the Royal Vault remained incomplete. Architect James Wyatt diligently toiled on constructing a corridor and vault beneath the oldest section of the chapel, later transformed into the Albert Memorial Chapel by Queen Victoria. The Royal Vault, an architectural marvel, mirrored the designs of the Hanoverian Royal Vault in Westminster. The endeavour led by Wyatt and his nephew Geoffrey culminated in the creation of the largest private burial vault in England during that period. The vault boasted a subterranean corridor and a vault platform entrance in the floor of the choir, meticulously engineered to facilitate a gradual descent through mechanisation. Princess Amelia's remains were transferred to the completed vault in 1810, followed by Augusta Duchess of Brunswick, the King's sister, in 1813. Tragically, the vault welcomed the remains of Princess Charlotte of Wales, the granddaughter of the King and Queen, along with her stillborn son, after their untimely demise in November 1817. The passing of Queen Charlotte on the 17th of November 1818 marked a poignant period of mourning. Her mortal remains lay in state at Kew Palace, her final sanctuary, in the last days of her earthly sojourn. The day of her funeral service, the 2nd of December 1818, was an event steeped in solemnity and reverence. The procession from Kew to Windsor commenced at 8 p.m, featuring a hearse drawn by 8 noble horses. The procession paused at Frogmore to receive dignitaries, including the Princes of Blood Royal. Notably absent from the funeral was the King, incapacitated by a prolonged illness, while the duties fell upon the shoulders of the Prince of Wales, acting as the Prince Regent at the time. The guest list was exclusive, permitting only 54 members of the general public to pay their respects. 40 yeomen, the Knights of the Garter, and individuals intimately connected with the royal family were among those granted entry. The medical attendants of the Queen, King, and Prince Regent, alongside the ladies of the bedchamber, keeper of robes, and other devoted attendants of the late Queen, also graced the occasion. The funeral service exuded solemn splendour, accentuated by the harmonious and emotive performance of the choir. The Dean of St. George's Chapel, the Honourable Henry Hobart, delivered the burial service with profound sadness, evoking a sense of reverence and respect. As the choir's harmonious melodies reverberated, the platform supporting the Queen's casket embarked on a gradual descent, orchestrated by what the New Monthly Magazine described as impeccable machinery, culminating at 25 minutes past 9. The graceful and deliberate descent of the casket marked the conclusion of a ceremony steeped in dignity and homage, a fitting tribute to a revered queen who left an undeniable mark on history.